Hi folks, you're with Tacitus today at your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining this live stream. In this chat, I'd like to talk about how even once prominent and respected news outlets have become nothing more than conveyor belts for propaganda pushed out by the globalist machine. So the idea that there's journalists working on news, doing research and all this sort of stuff, it just doesn't exist. All the big media sites that were once very respected are now globalist propaganda machines. And I just want to just sort of go through, and this is a website, I've got it right in front of me now, of a news outlet that once was considered to be the final word on quality journalism and accuracy, and I'm using the word honesty, and I'm not sure that's right ever to be used in journalism, but at least accurate, reliable, dependable information and independent. So now, boy, have things changed. There's a pro COVID vaccine story to lead with. The second story is a pro COVID vaccine story. The third story is one about how white people are eating too much meat and they have to reduce their meat consumption and eat insects. And a scientific study is cited here as being the basis for this story. But if you actually go to, and it's not hard, you go to a couple of globalist, sort of pro-globalist websites, and you find virtually the same story there. Few words change. If you look at the so-called scientific study, it's not a scientific study. It's from a fucking globalist propaganda outlet, and they've just used activists and paid them to produce some crap, which have been misinterpreted, in order to gin it up and juice it up anyway. So that's one. The next one is how the government has to give more money to black kids, otherwise they might be in poverty, and there's fears and universal fears about this, and so but you look at the story, and there's some activists have said that they believe there's potential for that, and then that's somehow turned into a headline story. Then there's saying that kids in private schools have more money per student, in terms of the money that per student cash available in terms of facilities and so on than do government schools, which is terrible. This has to be changed. So the argument goes again, the standard activists, bullshit studies by angry lesbian academics and so on. So all the propaganda there. But their main concern when you go through a story is that the kids in private schools aren't being plied with the same critical race, or not to the same extent, the critical race theory, not being taught to hate white people and to hate their country and to hate Western society, or certainly not to the same extent as the kids in the government schools are. Now, they cite this difference, but what they don't do is they don't include the massive bureaucratic administration cost of the state education sector, and they just count the money that's going into the schools, assuming that's even accurate, and I doubt it is, but they just count that and then compare that to but these private schools, or not all of them, but many of them don't have nowhere near the size of the bureaucracy that the state schools have. So if once you add in the massive state bureaucracy, the education bureaucracy, and add that back into the mix, then kids in state schools are actually getting quite a lot more money than private schools. But of course they fiddle the numbers to try and make out as if there's rich elites who are getting away with it somehow, but that's kind of not true. The next story is about cultural icons, which for some reason, this is a white country, are only allowed to be non-white, and again the same nonsense that's being used in the story. Then there's how how there's a labour shortage in Western countries. This can only be solved by bringing out masses of black and brown peasants, which again is straight out of the globalist talking point playbook. Then a story about how the army should be brought in to anyone that doesn't get it's a COVID story. Anyone that doesn't get the vaccine should be fired, and the army should be brought in to make sure that essential services are continue. So it's fine with firing all these people, many of whom are quite poor people and so on. Hey, that doesn't matter. Another story about COVID again, about how masks should be kept in high schools indefinitely, or schools rather, indefinitely. Then there's a story about how the vaccines are going into the furthest reaches of the planet, and wouldn't you believe it, there's a black female starring in the image of getting a vaccine. Then there's a scare story. If you don't get the vaccine, you could get gangrene and your fingers and toes will all drop off. Talk about a scare story there. Then there's a story about how gay people are being discriminated against because of HIV. Then a story about how there needs to be more censorship of right-wing people on social media. Then there's a heartwarming story about a very handicapped person who's trying to lead a life that could only be led by a very healthy non-handicapped person. And if anyone disagrees with that, they're damn Nazis. And another COVID story pushing the vaccine. Then a story about how brown people are being discriminated against by those evil, wicked white folks. And that's the main story. But I went through those just to give you an illustration that every one of those stories is a globalist push story and globalist talking point. There is not a single news story there that is actually newsworthy. It is all propaganda. It is all propaganda, and it's being pushed at you 24/7 out of all the major news stations across the world. Now I can go to a number of other, and have, by the way, just a little bit earlier, gone to a number of other news sites in other countries and other regions and other news networks, and it's more or less the same. There's the same talking points, maybe packaged slightly differently, but the same talking points are being pushed all across these news stations, and that gives you an idea of the globalist control of the media and the amount of propaganda we see. So certainly food for thought there. You've been with Tacitus today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for joining.